It is the Everton Byline, episode 24. I am Matt Jones. I am joined, as ever, by Paddy Boyland, who has just, in the last hour or so, got back from Finch Farm to speak to the new Everton manager, who is the old Everton manager, David Moyes. Paddy, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, new and old Everton manager. Funny phrasing these tweets and things on Blue Sky, and you're like, David Moyes' first press conference as Everton manager. Again, doesn't sound quite right. David Moyes' first press conference since returning as Everton manager, maybe. Yeah, distinctly out with the old in with the new, but the new looks very like the old as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think we said on Friday, call it the ghosts of Everton's past, present, and future, but hard to know which one was which, or maybe they're all exactly the same. But yeah, we'll of course be talking about that in a bit more detail later on. Just as ever, a reminder: we are sponsored by the Bridewell. Thanks to people who've tagged the Bridewell and tagged us in things on social media. That is a great help, and obviously great to see the message getting out there and people going and enjoying it. So if you do go into the Bridewell, let people behind the bar know. Let Dom know. He's always behind the bar chatting away in his waistcoat. Just give him a shout. Tell him you heard about that pub from the Blue Room. If you're watching us on YouTube, do hit like, hit subscribe, and leave us a comment. We had loads of people watch our YouTube video on Friday last week, Paddy. So if you're back again, really appreciate it. Make it a long-term thing. Click subscribe, and you'll be with us for the rest of the year. Then don't just make it a one-off. And of course, same goes. You listen to us on iTunes or on Spotify as well. Leave us a rating and leave us a review, and again, hit subscribe so you get notified whenever we produce a new podcast or new show. So yeah, just in fact, I just wanted to say, I actually really appreciate everybody who got in touch with us after Friday's show, because it was a lot, and it was largely much entirely positive. Obviously, a really busy few days, and great to see so many Blues sort of excited and getting involved ahead of a potential exciting new era.
Absolutely. Delighted really to see so many people enthusiastic about the stuff we put out, but also enthusiastic about what comes next for Everton, which is obviously more important still. The most important thing here in all of this. It has been a mad, probably week or so, really, in terms of Dyche going and Moyes very quickly coming through the door. I mean, these things unravelled very quickly. I mean, in the space of a couple of days for Dyche, and then arguably David Moyes was spoken to by Everton for the first time formally on Friday. And by Friday evening, as we and others have reported, it was all done, all agreed, paperwork signed, and all that was left was to announce him on Saturday morning. So, I mean, things have moved very quickly. One thing you can't accuse the freaking group of doing is letting the grass grow, because days after a new manager is out, another one comes in. And I suppose now the big question is he the right man?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to start off this week. We're going to move the squad number section to the end of the show, just in case anyone's panicking. Yeah. That will be there. And we're going to start off this week with a comment actually we had on YouTube, and I know you wanted to take a bit of time to address this instead of replying on the actual comments, but it's from at @missing_score. So fascinating to hear Paddy's Dyche sacked article prep goes back 2 months. I'd love to know what triggers that preparation. Is it a gut feeling, in quotes, this manager is teetering? Because it's not something he'd always have, regardless of how well the manager was doing. So as early as October, Paddy was trying to be ready for his sack, or was that more of a prep in advance, knowing his contract was expiring and just being ready for at least the summer exit? Thanks for the episode. Always enjoy listening to the pod. So you just wanted to give a bit more detail on that, Paddy, as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, something we discussed on last week's podcast, but basically what tends to happen is that as soon as something like Dyche leaving happens, we in the media are tasked with producing reams and reams of information on it, and some of that can be gleaned after the manager's gone, but a lot of it needs to take place before. So you're constantly trying to make sure that you're keeping abreast of what's happening, and you're taking notes. And I take notes regularly on just about everything that is said to me and that I see and that I hear, all that kind of stuff. From my perspective, it kind of felt like the longest Dyche would be at the club was until the summer, when his contract ran out. I thought there was very, very little chance, obviously, that he would be getting an extension. And while that initially may have seemed like the most likely scenario in all of this, there was obviously a turn of events where Everton lost a lot of games over Christmas. New ownership came in, and then there was a very early decision to make. So we have to be ready for those moments. We can't be caught on the hop. So you kind of see a manager that's under pressure. You kind of see a manager that's not going to be hanging around. And if he is hanging around, it's only for another couple of months or more. All that information that I accrued in the article, that could have, in essence, gone out at the end of the season as well, had he been dismissed that way. But as it happened, it came a lot sooner, and maybe given recent events, that's not a huge surprise. I mean, we said there, it unravelled very quickly. It did. And I actually think that the Bournemouth game was a massive catalyst in that. I think he probably came away pretty deflated, as all of us did, and not only the result but the nature of the performance. There was maybe a feeling that this just wasn't working out, and that I think that just accelerated everything. So we had to be ready, and we were, Matt. I mean, within an hour or two of him going, there's pieces on site, and then next morning there's a follow-up that I think I started writing at about 6 a.m. in the morning. The same with Takeover, by the way. Like my Takeover piece was produced over the course of the weeks before that was announced, and I'd actually written it, I think, 2 days prior to official confirmation. It went out soon after confirmation. It's just, I suppose it's a coping mechanism for media to just be ready, and you can always make little tweaks here or there based on information that you hear. That is also commonplace.
Yeah, like in our work, we have those, and like, I don't know if you call them, they're called shells, and effectively,
Shells. Yeah.
So effectively, you just go in and like you change, obviously, details in bold, or like 3 X's or something like that to sort of symbolize. You need to enter something here, like because as much as it's important to be right and everything, there's obviously a pressure on people to be first now as well, to get those get the eyes on stuff. But like, I want to ask you, are there any stories, be it about managers or transfers or anything else, that you've got ready and you've had thousands of words in your drafts and they've never seen the light of day? Because I'm sure there's things that have gone on at Everton, and I know there's things that have gone on at Everton that they produced graphics for, and potential statements for, that because of massive turn of events that they've sort of been binned. And I imagine that there's a folder somewhere of all the what could have beens that maybe one day will come out if we get a rogue employee or something. But I'm never going to see the light today. But have you got any of them you willing to disclose with us?
Yeah, I think that's fairly common across the industry. The one that comes to mind for me was before Rafa Benitez's appointment, when initially the lead candidate, if people can remember, was actually Nuno. Now at Forest, formerly of Wolves. I did never get as far as producing an in-depth piece on Nuno, but I'd certainly watched an awful lot of Wolves matches and spoken to various contacts about him and compiled pretty extensive notes to be ready to go should it move on. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but maybe if Everton had got Nuno, then they would have avoided the whole Rafa Benitez chapter, which is obviously a pretty turgid spell for the club. And maybe we would have avoided some of the fallout after that as well, the chaos that ensued after that. So yeah, that's the one that springs to mind. But thankfully, not too many. Thankfully, there's not been many kind of fully written pieces that hadn't seen the light of day. I mean, if the Takeover one had gone belly up for the last minute, then that would have been gut-wrenching on a whole load of levels. What'd you say?
How many words was that one?
Oh, God. The Takeover read was pretty extensive. I mean, it was pointed out to me by somebody else that there was a comment below one of my pieces the other day which saying that I should actually charge The Athletic based on how many words I write in any given week, and I'd be very, very quickly be a rich man.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who edits pieces, I agree that you should cut them down. Brevity is best. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. just to save time, but no, it's fascinating. And I also got caught by the Nuno one as well, because I remember speaking to Lindsay Hooper, who gave us a great interview, loads of insight, well, I'm pretty sure we put it out actually, and everyone was commenting saying he sounds like such a great guy. I'm actually quite excited now. But alas, it all went belly up.
That wasn't what we were hearing, by the way. Like some of the stuff
Yeah.
I'd heard about him was like he had quite a tight inner circle, and like there was like he had his favourites, but if you weren't in his group of favourites, then it was easy to feel ostracised and stuff like that. So I think there has been some negative feedback on him in Everton's due diligence. But obviously, in some ways, a very decent manager. And what you have to remember there is that he was the heavy favourite early doors and somebody Everton had spoken to. So there was a chance it happened. Obviously didn't. And then they pivoted to Benitez. And we all know how that turned out. So sliding doors moments, Matt, but there's loads of them. And the latest one happened last week with Dyche going to Kevin Thelwell and the ownership and saying, I think my race here is run. And then we end up with David Moyes back at the helm days later, which I think he, by his own admission today, even he didn't see coming, even recently.
Definitely, and that does take us on to the next point and what happened today at Finch Farm. I'm sure everybody's seen the press conference by now and what Moyes had to say. No surprise, really. I think Paddy that he spoke well and he spoke passionate at the time, and I think he said certain things, certain phrases that will definitely resonate with people. Most notably for me, the fact that he wants to have elite players in the elite stadium. I think that's one that will hang around, so to speak, if we do want to do well under Moyesy. But you were there. Look at me, Moyesy. Oh, I'm straight back in. Bought in. But you were there. Like, and I wanted to know what it was like from. I know you don't go to every press conference, but what was different about today compared to your standard run of the mill middle of a manager's press conference, sort of when you rock up at Finch Farm?
I mean, the first thing is just the busyness. I mean, I got there probably half an hour before it all kicked off, or 30 minutes before it was meant to kick off. Probably 45 by the time Moyes actually came out. And I'm not going to make a comment about timekeeping yet, Matt, because...
Was he late, was he?
He was. He was about 10 to 15 minutes later. I just remember
that
thinking
is disappointing.
Some things never change here with Everton managers. I was hoping for a clean break. I thought he would be pretty fastidious with his timekeeping, and it'd be kind of... If he says 4:30, it's going to happen at 4:30. I mean, we'll forgive him. He's been a busy man. Monday was his first full day as Everton manager, and it was the first time he took a proper training session out on the pitch. But yeah, a little bit late. The first thing you notice, like being there kind of 30 minutes ahead of schedule, is just how busy the place is in comparison to even a normal press conference week. I mean, like really difficult to get parking space in Finch Farm. A clutter of cameras trying to get the best inside the press room, trying to get the best view of Dyche for photos and videos.
Get the best view of who, Paddy? You just said best view of Dyche.
Did I? That was a Freudian slip. Best view of...
I don't know if you saw, actually, just to interrupt you there as well. We had a comment last week on Spotify saying, can you ask Paddy to never say the phrase nuts and bolts ever again?
I nearly responded to that.
Dyche is rubbing off on you a little bit. You said that on the pod last week. So you need to ease all these Dycheisms out of your lexicon now.
Well, I was also worried. One of the other famous things that people do when a new manager comes in is they're so used to starting a question with the name of the old manager that I mean, like one of the things I was playing through my head as I went into the press conference room was just don't call him Sean. Secondly, don't call him Moisey, but don't call him Sean. So I mean, busy, really busy. Lots of cameras about trying to strain to get the best view of the new Everton manager, David Moyes. And that's the first thing you notice. I suppose the other as well is that press conferences don't normally go on for that amount of time. So I mean, it wasn't a normal press conference to preview Everton v Aston Villa. It was David Moyes' inauguration, effectively, plus some bits on the Villa game. And you probably, anybody that's watched it in full will see that the usual questions, really, the kind of quite functional stuff about injuries and whatever else, they either weren't asked or they came very late in the day. I mean, like my one question to him towards the end was basically who's in your coaching staff, who's going to be in your backroom staff, because the club haven't formally put anything out on that. We've all heard rumours, we've all seen those rumours, and I think it's been apparent for a few days that Billy McKinlay would be joining as assistant manager. Had been rumours of Baines, there had been rumours of Alan Irvine, who'd obviously been with Moyes in that first spell at Goodison, and Moyes confirmed those to us very late in the presser. So not an ordinary day. I don't want to get into the he spoke well stuff, because I've got a colleague at The Athletic that, in Adam Hurrey, football cliches, who knows that that's coming after basically every new manager press conference. But it was interesting. It was really quite interesting in a whole load of ways. And I think the stuff that you'll immediately recognise and people will focus on, but there's other bits that kind of just slide by that people will pick up on later, further down the line. Like, I thought the bit on Dominic Calvert-Lewin, for example, was pretty fascinating, because he basically said, didn't he, like, he should be the main man. We want him to be the main man, but he's not at the moment. We have to kind of get him back to where he was. So the other funny one, Matt, on the way to Finch Farm was in. Did you see the interview he did with the club channel? And I think he at one point says something along the lines of, like, it's not all on the managers, like, it's up to the players to, and I'm paraphrasing here, book up their ideas too. And that kind of made me chuckle. So there's loads in it, but I thought it was a decent reintroduction to life at Everton. You could see in what he said and in his mannerisms and his facial expressions that he was made up to be back at the club. And I think that goes back to something we were saying last week on the podcast when this news about him broke, and we were saying he had options from clubs around Everton in the Premier League table, potential relegation rivals, and he'd said he didn't really want to go to a club in that part of the table when he'd dismissed their interest. But this is different for him. This is Everton, and it kind of feels as though he believes he's back sort of where he belongs.
The stuff that I thought I was really interested to ask you is stuff that kind of happens when the cameras are off. So I'm not asking this actually before we started recording, probably should, but did you go into the embargoed section after the press conference?
No, so we don't do that. That I mean, just so people know, obviously there's a broadcast section that people see, and that's on YouTube, but then there's a separate section after the main press conference, and that's purely for pre-match stuff, by the way, where a much smaller group of people who probably don't speak in the broadcast section will then ask questions. So you don't normally hear questions from the Times or the Liverpool Echo or the Guardian. A lot of the newspapers have always worked on 10:30 embargoes, and the broadcast section is really for Sky Sports and BBC, people putting out video content as much as anything else. We've always been slightly unusual in the sense that we're not a newspaper, so we weren't in the newspaper section, but we're not broadcast either. So we kind of fall between a couple of stools there. So yeah, just in the broadcast section. But most people leave the room, and then some others will ask questions in private. And normally those answers are embargoed until 10:30, either the evening of the press conference or, depending on when the next game is, potentially the evening before the match.
So the question I was going to ask you, sort of like, what was you like when the cameras weren't rolling, sort of thing? But I imagine you only really get that sense when you sit down with him in the embargo section afterwards. But I mean, did you get much of an insight to that? Obviously, he came in and sort of said that there's some old faces in the room, including himself. I think that, you know, a bit of a dad gag, wasn't it, really? But did you get a sense of how he felt and how his demeanour was, just sort of in between those moments when he was live, or was it just a bit too quick?
No,
read on it.
It all happened so quickly. I mean, he was kind of ushered in by Everton's press officer, and immediately then you can see this flash of photographs and people taking pictures. He held up his Everton shirt, as a new Everton shirt, as people will have well seen, and then straight bang into questions from Sky Sports and others. And like I said, that lasted quite a long period of time. I mean, I think the best colour comes from, like, when you watch those club videos where you see that he's being shown around and he's in some ways familiarising himself with a place that he knows very well. But that has changed Finch Farm since he was last there. In some ways, parts of the the facility have been extended since he's been away. So, I mean, that's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, he knows the place, but it's also it's changed ever so slightly, and it'll take a bit of adaptation. I thought it was interesting when he said that, like when he came back on Sunday to look around again, that he was kind of a bit nervous, a bit apprehensive. It was almost like a first day back at school thing, and I suppose we all kind of feel that at times, don't we? Whether you're a high-profile manager in the best league in the world, or you somebody like us just doing our jobs, or whatever job it may be. So not much insight, but I think you're right. I think sometimes managers put a bit of a veil up when the cameras are rolling, and they're very different when everything stops and they're just with other assembled members of the media. I've had that myself when I've spoken to Marco Silva before in kind of closer, tighter confines. And the point I'd always make about Marco...
would he be more like relaxed, would he, and open?
Yeah. I think it's natural to be more relaxed. Yeah, I think it's natural to be more relaxed, because you know that your every word isn't being beamed out straight away. I mean, there you're accountable. If you mess something up or you say the wrong thing, then it's gone before you can do anything about it. So that's quite natural for managers. And to use the example of Marco Silva, I found when the cameras were rolling, he was very different to how he was when they stopped. He was much more affable, much more likable in kind of those smaller groups, and actually quite charming at times. And his big mistake was maybe that he put a veil up. He didn't ever really show that to supporters and to fans. So you have to be aware of all this stuff. I mean, I think that with Moyes a little bit more what you see is what you get. I don't think there's quite as big a gulf as there would be between Silva and his two personalities, if you want to call them that. But it was good. It's good day, optimistic feel about the place. People with smiles on their faces again, which we've obviously not seen for quite a while. And while there's an acknowledgement, obviously, that Everton need to get out of this mess they're in, the situation, and push on up the table, I think most people are comforted by the fact that he's back. It goes back to something we said on Friday, doesn't it?
Yeah, like I think I said, it's like getting home from a day's work and putting like an old jumper on, like a nice fitting pair of jeans or something like that. It's just, it is that comforting feeling again, isn't it? Of like, you just, I think someone on our YouTube comments, forgive me, I've forgotten who it was, said, Moyes is like go in the shops in your pajamas. Like it's that sort of thing, like where you just feel totally at ease with it all. And I did get that. And just one last question I wanted to ask you about the press conference. And we've gone quite nerdy on the journalism stuff today, and this is another one. So obviously he came into the room there and he said there's some old faces, and there will be a large portion of that press pack that Moyes knows from the previous time. Probably certainly a lot of the national journalists who cover Everton and Northwest football, if you will. So from your perspective, how do you approach that now? I mean, do you feel like you need to form a relationship with? I don't know if you've got one already necessarily with Moyes, but do you feel like you've got to form a relationship with Moyes? And is that complicated by the fact he's got a lot of contact already from previously when you weren't working in the industry? And if you do feel like you need to do that, how do you go about that? Is that purely done through press conferences after the games where you'll, like you like the likes of Joe from the Echo as well did with Dyche, where you ask questions? Is that really the main time which you go about doing that, would you say?
Yeah, it's face to face, but I think often these relationships are forged more again when the cameras aren't rolling, and when, for example, you're on a pre-season tour somewhere where you speak to people in more relaxed settings. I mean, found that speaking to staff and players, they were much more relaxed in those pre-season environments, and that helped. And also in then seeing you in my case, I'll have spoken to people in the US on pre-season tours. I've spoken to people in Switzerland. I've spoken to people in Dublin over the summer. Then there's more of a familiarity, and I think one of the things I try to guard against is this idea that like I'm this almost like faceless journalist. There's just a name that's out there in the ether that is writing bad things sometimes about people and criticizing them when things are going badly. I think that the best way to humanise in any job, in any line of work, is to have that face-to-face rapport and that face-to-face contact. So, I mean, in this case, for example, I wasn't there reporting on Moyes' teams 11 years ago, more than 11 years ago. I'd have been in the stands as a kid watching them, but because he's played such a key figure in Everton's modern history, and because he's been linked with the job many times, I've probably done stuff. Well, I've interviewed him before. There will be some sense of familiarity on his side because he'll have been interviewed by me and my colleagues at The Athletic countless times. So he'll know the name of the company. He'll know, I'd imagine he'll know what we do, and he'll remember our interviews. And that always helps. So I tend to not think beyond that, really. And then things kind of take their course. There was no, people probably will have inferred this and gathered it from stuff we've said before and just from interactions they'll have seen on YouTube. But I don't think many people in the media had a particularly positive working relationship with Sean Dyche. And I don't mean that it was always negative. It wasn't slanging matches. I mean, far from it. There was none of that. But it was never particularly warm or never particularly friendly. It was always there was a barrier up, and it was like, you're a journalist, I'm the manager, and I'll answer your questions, but that's kind of it. And sometimes the exchanges weren't great. So I don't think you necessarily need that, but it is a help if it happens.
No, it does sort of tie in again, doesn't it, to this idea that this is something new, but something old at the same time, because you've got those relationships that will last there. Like I imagine if Everton went and got Mourinho, like everybody's starting from the same position, really, aren't they? Apart from maybe a select few. So no, fascinating stuff. And to go along with the cliche, you did speak great, I thought, and I did get that warm feeling back. But yeah, like you said, I think every manager in the new press conference, I think every manager could stand up and say anything other than "I hate Everton," and they would get told they've spoken well there. But Moyes, as I'm going to call him now because he's ours again, did great there. And
you can call him that, Matt. I can't.
I can call him it. Yeah, I can call him it as much as I want because I don't go into these press conferences, and I'm sure we'd be mates as well. I'm sure he would like me, so I'm sure he won't mind too much. Let's finish off with our final points as I've thrown this ahead a little bit and try and dig in a little bit to some of the finer details. You said there, you asked him about his coaching staff, so he's kind of confirmed that, not fully officially, but announced, as you mentioned there. In terms of the contract as well, Paddy, as far as I'm aware, unless it's come out in any of the correspondence today, the club haven't confirmed the length of contract yet for this deal, have they either?
It's very rare, actually. I think for clubs to confirm some of these details now. Right, I mean, it's the same with transfer fees. I mean, how often do you see undisclosed in transfer fees?
They'll say on a next year deal, won't they, for a player?
So, most of the time, yeah. But what I'm saying is that sometimes these deals aren't revealed, and I suppose you're right to pick up on the being an omission of sorts. All I can say is that ourselves and various others have reported it as 2.5 years, and that's based on, I mean, in our case, multiple conversations and running it by the club, obviously, as we would always do with a story of that nature. So it is 2.5 years. And I'm not going to be able to give people any more specifics beyond that. If people have follow-up questions on, is there a break clause and everything else? 2.5 years. That's what we know right now. And if anything changes on that, then obviously we'll report as such.
I mean, I've seen a lot of people a little bit miffed about that, but from my perspective, it's, Everton is still in a bit of a desperate situation. Maybe desperate's I suppose it is the right word, actually, isn't it? They are in a desperate situation because they're appointed above the relegation zone. The previous manager went to the owners and said, "I've had enough of this," effectively, and they've had to act quickly. So I think from that perspective, Moyes, when Everton come to him and say, "Do you want to come back again?" he kind of holds all the cards, doesn't he?
Yeah.
From that point of view. So Everton can't effectively go to him and go, "Listen, we'll give you 6 months," because he's obviously going to say no. So it would be interesting to get a few more finer details further down the line about that contract. But 2.5 years for me, it's kind of what I expected, because no manager, and certainly someone like Moyes as well, who I don't think he sees himself yet as that come in, save the day, leave at the end of the season sort of manager. I think he still sees, and he sort of alluded to this today, didn't he? I think he still sees himself as somebody who can come into a club and build something over the course of a few years instead of come in and firefight for a few months. So from his point of view, it makes total sense for him to say, well, I don't just want to be here for this season, the next few months. I want guarantees that can stick around, regardless of this being the last season at Goodison or the first season at the new ground.
Well, it's just job security, isn't it?
Yeah.
The same with anything. I mean, my job doesn't really work this way, but let's say, for argument's sake, you have to negotiate contracts year on year in your line of work. You push for as long as possible, don't you? And I do tend to agree with you. I think all the cards really were Moyes', weren't they? In the sense, you've got very few managers out of work who can step in right now. Very few of his experience with his knowledge of the Premier League and the club. People that would want to come back and were able to come back right now. Graham Potter, as we've mentioned, who was admired by some at Goodison, he was no longer available. So as soon as they say they want him, he's holding a lot of the cards, if not all of the cards. And he's not the type, as you say, to just go back in for 6 months and then say, look, I'm done. He'll have wanted assurances and promises that he had the potential to lead Everton into the new stadium. So let's see. 2.5 years is a long time, and my slight concern with 2.5 years for any manager, and I'm not talking about David Moyes specifically here, but for any manager, is that if you look back over Farhad Moshiri's time at the club, I think it was only Roberto Martinez who got to. I mean, actually, he bulleted Martinez, didn't he? So no managers did 2 years, and Dyche just came up short. What that meant, obviously, was that at various points Everton had to pay off quite hefty chunks of money and quite sizable parts of those remaining deals. You don't really want to get into a cycle of doing that again. That's how you get back into issues, back into trouble with profitability and sustainability rules. That's how you get back into trouble with it when it comes to building a squad and kind of constant churn and all that kind of stuff. So let's see how it goes. But 2.5 years, if I'd been predicting before, Matt, I'd have probably said 18 months. So it was a bit longer than I expected. But obviously, by the time it got to Friday, we were in a position, based on our knowledge from multiple different sources and run again through and past all the kind of the key figures here, including the club, we were in a position to say it's 2.5 years.
Yeah. And finally, on the sort of more intricate details of his appointment, I put a question out on Blue Sky earlier today, Paddy, sort of saying, if anyone's got any questions about this today, let us know. And effectively all of them were about Moyes and Kevin Thelwell. And obviously I think a lot was read into the fact that when Everton announced Moyes, the statements had quotes from Moyes himself and Mark Watts as well. It did not have anything from Thelwell or in the follow-up days. There was, in that video you mentioned from sort of Everton Unseen, there was a nice little clip of Thelwell showing Moyes around Finch Farm. But it's going to be an interesting dynamic, certainly, isn't it? Because over the weekend, one of my colleagues, Chris Beasley, did a piece sort of looking back at Moyes' quotes about directors of football in the past. And I think it's fair to say he doesn't reflect on them particularly favourably. And certainly when he was at Everton the first time round, he was someone, wasn't he, who wanted to be in control. He wanted to look at players and scout players himself. And he did a very good job of it. And certainly at West Ham as well, I think towards the end, he had a few run-ins with their director of football as well, didn't he? So certainly want to keep an eye on that. And I think one of the things we said before the Freakins came in was that the two things they maybe had to sort as a priority were maybe CEO and the director of football. And obviously they've had to act when it comes to the manager. And it just leaves Kevin Thelwell in a very interesting position, because I suppose from a baseline point of view, Paddy, if you look at it, certainly how I'm looking at the moment, you talk about job security there. If ultimately those two are in a room and are in disagreement on a player. One of them's got 6 months left on his contract at Everton. One's got 2.5 years on his deal. I think it's clear at the moment who holds the power. If it does come to that situation where maybe there's a bit of a rut in their heads.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's inevitable now that we're getting so many questions and there's so much focus on Kevin Thelwell, just because he's like one of those key pillars of the club whose future needed to be resolved. And I think part of me wondered, like, how quickly were the Freakins going to come in and look to resolve some of this stuff? But obviously, we've spoken before about the importance of sorting out kind of the top hierarchy, CEO and everything else. That I think it's going to take a little bit more time still to finalise it all. I mean, they were almost rushed into a decision on the manager that they maybe wouldn't have wanted quite so soon. But yeah, I think attention now turns quite considerably to Kevin Thelwell's status as director of football and what's going to happen to that position moving forward. And I know my focus has already turned to it in some ways journalistically. It remains kind of the great unresolved thing at the club right now. Certainly from people that are there right now. And I think the dynamic's going to be fascinating. I mean, the first clue we'll get is how January pans out and what kind of players come in. We'll all be looking at the profile of players and are they a Thelwell signing in quotation marks? Are they a Moyes signing in quotation marks? Are they a TFG signing? And let's hope they're not. But a TFG
we don't want to go down the three number 10s again, where each big wig at the football club signed the number 10
No,
each that summer.
But I mean, you're right to point out, as is Chris, who's obviously written some pieces on it. As am I. I've written pieces or reflected on it over the last few days on that dynamic, because Moyes was a very old school manager at Everton in the sense that he did everything with his had a chief scout, Robbie Cook, who he trusted and he lent on heavily, and he lent on his backroom staff heavily when it came to scouting of players. But Moyes famously would speak to scouts and kind of tell them where to go and ask them where they were going. And he wanted to go to a lot of games himself. I mean, there's that famous example of him. I think he spotted Joleon Lescott 20 times, watched him 20 times before eventually signing off on that deal over Robert Huth, as it was at the time. And that's the kind of person he is. I think he wants what's come through in a lot of what he said recently is that he wants to be held accountable and he wants other people to be held accountable. So if he's signing the players, then yeah, he's accountable. But if it's a director of football, he said he will work in that system, but that obviously then the responsibility needs to be attributed differently and everything else. So let's see how much. I think the big question now is how much is handed over to him in terms of that responsibility. Is he the one that has final say? Does he work collaboratively with Thelwell on these signings? Those dynamics are going to be really, really interesting now. And let's be honest, we don't know until it happens. So that's where all the answers will come from. The answers will come from the remainder of this transfer window.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say if we start getting linked to players like Souček and Kufal, then we probably know who's calling the shots from that point of view. But we will see. We will see on that. I mean, I wouldn't mind either of them, to be fair. I think they're both all right. But
no,
yeah,
neither.
You don't like Souček?
I mean, I could see Souček more, but I want to see more pace and more dynamism in this team.
That is true. Yeah,
it sounds reductive, but like another central midfielder, even if he's somebody that might weigh in with a few more goals, is not really top of the list right now. I think they just need to find some way of getting some dynamism in there, putting teams on the back foot a little bit, being able to counter better. Is that part of Dyche's problem? Was, of course, like they sat deep, but unlike Nottingham Forest, they had no way of getting out and causing problems. Like, look at the pace in that Forest team with Alanga, and Gibbs White's not the quickest, but Hudson-Odoi and Souza and players like that. There's an awful lot of pace there, and Everton don't have that to the same extent. So, I mean, like if I could ask for one thing from the remainder of this window, it's an injection of that, an injection of attacking quality, an injection of pace and dynamism. And let's see. I think the window will be fascinating for the reasons outlined. It's like who holds the power there, who's signing off players, how collaborative is it, and then what does that say almost by default about the director of football situation?
No, fair enough. I just had an image of Suchek growing an afro and being the new Fellaini. Seen his work.
I can see that. I mean, they are quite similar in some
Very
ways.
similar players.
Fellaini a better player, by the way.
I don't know, but not much in it. But yeah, I love Fellaini. But I think they're really good. But yeah, pace is definitely the priority for this window. We'll wrap it up there, Paddy, because I know you've got loads to do. But we'll quickly go through the 24s. Have you got them up?
Yep.
Got them up there? So
I did. I take a screenshot now before every podcast.
So it is a bit of a mixed bag.
Well, who do you want to speak about, Matt? Who do you want to speak about?
Guillaume Plessis.
Guillaume Plessis. All right, over to you for 5 minutes on Guillaume Plessis, please.
Don't think he ever played for us, did he?
Not to my knowledge. But you put me on the spot.
Players though, but like I think again we had I think a few of these 20s. There's players who just hogged them for years. So Tim Howard obviously had the 24 for 9 years. Looking at this, but since then we've had Anthony Gordon, Umar Niasse, and then before there was Tim Howard. Then before Tim Howard, it was Guillaume Plessis, James McFadden, and David Ginola. What a duo that is.
Abel Xavier.
I remember watching McFadden when we beat Leeds 4-0. Do you know when Steve Watson scored the hat-trick? And he was absolutely amazing. I remember thinking, what have we signed here? He's incredible. With his little rat tail at the back of his hair, just dangling down, and he did his step overs. But obviously,
you can't have Everton players with rat tails either, Matt. I'm sorry, like it just shouldn't be allowed.
He had some great moments early on, didn't he? And then he only wore that shirt for 1 year as well. Then he went to 11, maybe. But he was
the Charlton goal 07-08?
Yeah, so he was number 11 then.
So that's a different James McFadden. This is James McFadden 24 rather than James McFadden 11. But if I talk more generally about James McFadden in his whole time at Everton, that goal stands out as one of my favourites that's been scored by Everton at Goodison in my time watching the club. It was a reminder of what he's capable of. Like, he did have like real technical quality at times, but I think he was just didn't have the same impact as Osman. But he was a little like Osman. He was like short of one or two elements needed to be like a top class player. Like Osman was pace. McFadden was a little bit the same. Like he good control, good technique, but just couldn't get away from players really in his position very, very easily. We're not going to talk about Anthony Gordon or refuse to speak about Anthony Gordon ever again until the next time we have to speak about Anthony Gordon. A shout out for Umar Niasse, who was not a very good footballer, but was treated very badly by Ronald Koeman and then helped towards the end of his time by scoring quite crucial goals.
I feel like Niasse is a bit like Mope in the sense that he's had so many shirt numbers. But I just wonder, like, I would also associate him with 19 for some reason. Did he even wear 19?
He's also nothing like Mope in the sense that Niasse is likeable and Mope quite clearly wasn't.
Yeah, Niasse did wear 19, but I think he had like one in the 30s as well when he got like binned off and then brought back again. But just to finish off 24, Paddy, Abel Xavier, not a good one that. Duncan Ferguson, when he first came back, and we wore 24 when we re-signed him for a season, and then he went back to 9.
He came back and scored against Charlton.
Yeah, scored 2, didn't he? He came off the bench, didn't he? And then before that, we've got Tony Grant. He's blue, he's white. And then John O'Connor, never heard of him. And Chris Priest.
I've heard of John O'Connor, but I've never heard of Chris Priest.
Unfortunately. Sorry, I know you're about to go, but I'm just going to get his page up now, see if we can find anything more about him. So we had spells at Macclesfield Town and Bangor City after he left.
I was about to say he sounds like somebody who played in the Welsh League.
There we go. And he did. He played in the Welsh League for 4 years after he left us. So
he's the Nathan Craig of the number 24 shirt.
There we go. We will leave it there anyway. I think it's dangerous doing that bit at the end of the show because it just means we can just go down rabbit holes and we'll be whittering on for ages. But that's it. That's it for this week. It's been a busy one. Cheers to Paddy. If you watch us on YouTube, do hit subscribe, do hit like, do leave us a comment, leave us questions, and we'll try and get stuck into them over the course of the next few weeks as we've done today. Great to get some interactivity on the go. Also, if you're listening to us on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else, leave us a rating, leave us a review. We are sponsored by the Bridewell. we'll be in there a few times this week. With our great pal Rob Vera is over Paddy, so we'll be out in town, frolicking around, having a few pints between the games, before, during, and after the game. So yeah, be a great couple of weeks, certainly. And yeah, that's it from us. We'll be back for episode 25, quarter century brought up next week. Great list of players as well to go through for the squad number. Hopefully we'll have 2 wins to talk about after 2 big games at Goodison Park.
We're on episode 100 soon, Matt, the way Everton are going with the news cycle.
Well, I don't count the specials in the overall, so I think we've probably done 27 overall, because we've done like a dice sacked one, we had a takeover one, and a transfer deadline one. So it's not really 24, but the regular ones, we'll keep the specials separate. But yeah, that's it. That's been the Everton Byline. Speak to you again soon. Up the Toffees.